It's back to school season, and even though I am a mom of 7, 5 of my children are school age from high school down to kindergarten, and then I have 2 toddlers. 5 of those are boys, so it's a lot of meals around here and food. But just because I homeschool doesn't mean I'm in the kitchen all day long every day cooking up. So like most moms, we need stuff that's prepped, prepared, or planned to get meals on the table. So today, my meal prep, mostly 90% from scratch, is going to be based off of my August fall menu plan that I planned out. I give this away free for my email subscribers, but what I'm doing to start the school off right is I am basically taking my fall menu and I'm doubling it and freezing what I can or prepping it, and that way it can just be reheated. And then also if nights are busy or we get home late or we have a weekend project, I can still pull from the freezer and be able to eat. Because I don't know about you, if you've ate out recently, it is so expensive. The only thing I prepped today is I did make a small batch of broth yesterday, and then I have a roast in the fridge that I am gonna braise in the oven while I get some other stuff done for enchilada filling, and enchiladas probably tonight, because when you're in the kitchen, it's so important to just double what you have, especially during a big day. Just plan on eating a little bit of whatever you're making. That way it just makes it a little bit easier on you also. And the third thing I prepped is I did 4 cups of pinto beans in water overnight with some apple cider vinegar. That helps come off that phytic acid that can give you bloating or gas. And I'm gonna rinse these off really good. I'm gonna get them in my Instant Pot to cook because I'm gonna need them for tonight, but also for some bean burritos for the kids. It's been a long time since I did that. I need my Instant Pot for something else, so I'm gonna go ahead and start the beans right now by rinsing them and putting them in here with some fresh, cool water. Instant Pot makes beans so much easier. And also, if you just wanna have beans and get away from canned to save you some money, beans are great just in Instant Pot and then can be frozen and used later.
I'm just rinsing my beans off, and then I will place in my Instant Pot with a bay leaf. I don't normally put seasonings right in there with the beans because honestly, I'm usually using the beans for multiple different things, and I just season when I actually cook with them in the final product. So fresh water, bay leaves, and I set my Instant Pot for 25 minutes on the bean setting and let them do their thing.
While the beans are cooking, I'm going to get my roast out. I love braising meat, and normally I would have at least 2 roasts. So the braising meat is not a weeknight meal unless you're at home all day, but it definitely is worth the trouble on a weekend getting 2 roasts or a big huge pork roast or something braising in the oven. The meat is so tender, something completely different than you get from the Instant Pot or the crock pot. There's just so much flavor built into a braise. It's so good if you've never tried it. But I'm gonna have a couple of things going in the oven, but I'm not worried about flavors swapping because my meat is gonna have a lid on it. But I am gonna cook up this butternut squash because it is starting to look a little sad, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm gonna do with this. Some of my kids want me to try a butternut squash soup, but I don't know that it's soup season yet because it's gonna be 92 degrees today. So I might end up turning that into something else, but I do need to get it cooked up, whether it goes in the freezer or I do something else. Let's get cooking on the meat. With braised meat, you wanna make sure that you season well, which I'm almost out of this, with a bunch of salt. And I'm gonna sear it in my pan before adding whatever liquid I'm gonna use because it just adds to that flavor profile. And you can absolutely just let the meat do the flavoring, or if you're going for a specific flavor profile like Mexican or Cuban or something like that, then your spices will reflect that. But just a braised meat with basic salt, pepper, garlic, onion, and letting it do its thing in some broth is amazing and super versatile, depending on what you're gonna add to it later. And normally I have some kind of braised meat in my freezer already prepped because it is so good. And I have some tallow in here. I'm almost out of that, so I need to render some down soon. So I'm gonna take this big, huge hunk, put it in here, and I'm gonna sear on all sides. My liquid of choice is just some broth that I made yesterday, but if I'm making like pork carnitas, I'll add orange juice and broth, or orange juice and lime juice for that flavor, those flavors to really come out. This is just basic because I'm going to hopefully be able to make dinner tonight and some enchilada mixture for the freezer. So I'm just doing salt, pepper, garlic, onion, and then I'm going to put this in the trash, wash my hands, and then flavor the other side. You can also cut this big chunk down if you want the oven to not run as much, but a big chunk like this, 300 degrees for about 4 to 6 hours depending. It can take less if it's chunked up, and then if you have like a big pot with more meat, it's gonna take longer. So worth it, I can't tell you.
If I would have made the decision to actually cut this up, I would have originally cut it up in chunks and then seared all sides. I decided afterwards, I just knew it would cook a little bit faster if I did go ahead and cut it up, so I did. And then I just let the residual heat on the pan saute that side. And then since I knew I was making this for dinner and then leftovers would be for enchiladas, I decided it would be smart just to go ahead and season it now with the flavors already cooking into it. So I threw some cumin and chili powder and paprika and garlic powder, and then I topped it off with broth. So my rule of thumb is I just add about to the top of the meat, I add the broth. A lot of it soaks in, some of it evaporates, but it concentrates that flavor of the broth. So a good broth makes a huge difference.
If your children are anything like mine, they like treats and snacks too. So, and if you've seen my recent once a month, now that it's fallen back to once a month grocery shopping, if it hasn't came out on my channel, it's coming out. I'm just waiting on my Azure order. But I bought these at the Amish store. It's a large container and I don't want it to go stale. So what I'm gonna do is make a fun treat for the kids that I can keep in the freezer and it can last way longer than going stale in this container. So I'm gonna start off with just laying down some pretzels. I'm gonna have to melt some chocolate with a little bit of coconut oil, and I'm just gonna do that on the stove. And then I buy Costco peanut butter because it's a little runnier and it makes it easier when I make granola or I'm baking some bars or something like that. It's runnier and it's easier to handle. So I'm gonna use a little bit of peanut butter for some protein. And then some of these I actually plan to also put on some coconut flakes. Not all of my children like coconut flakes, but enough of them do. So I'm gonna put a bunch of that. And then I might chop up some nuts and put some nuts on top because more protein is always a good thing. I'm just gonna put some hot water in a bowl to warm this up just a little bit because I know I'm towards the end, like halfway. And then the coconut oil, I'm just gonna put like a tablespoon of coconut oil in there. And I'm gonna use the rest of this chocolate. I have more in the freezer, but we're gonna see how far that gets me. And then I have coconut flakes. These are the small shreds, but it'll work just as well. And I'll get that going real quick. Oh, some of those got a lot more chocolate than others. I made a little bit of a mess, but that's okay. I feel like after these are frozen and I pull off all the pretzels, we're gonna have a field day with lunch with the remainder on the parchment paper, which is gonna be just fine. I decided to skip the nuts. I did coconut in half and then half just peanut butter and chocolate. And then I will portion these out once they are frozen.
I actually love snacks that I can prep and freeze because that means I always have something in the freezer, whether it's to round off a meal or to have a snack, or if friends stop by or we want a last minute dessert, there's always something that I can pull from the freezer. So this is definitely going into my notebook to keep in rotation for something for the freezer. And then I might have a dishwasher, but not everything can go in the dishwasher, so I'm constantly washing to keep things cleaned up. So if I need to stop at any moment, I'm ready to stop. And then I'm always referring to my list to make sure I am on task doing what I need to do.
Okay, this next one is one that I have been making for my children for a decade probably, and that is baked oatmeal. And usually I do a 9x13 or a pie dish, but I'm gonna make them into mini cups. That way they could be more of a grab and go, or if I have a choose your own breakfast, they can pick a couple things that they want of themselves. And this is great because depending on the time of year, you can add whatever seasonal flavor you want. Today I am going to do blueberries. Since we don't live on a homestead and don't have chickens, eggs are precious because I have to buy them. So in a recipe like this, I actually use flax, ground flax. It acts as the binder, which is what the egg is, and it adds some nutrition, and then the eggs are left for like fresh eating. Always like to sneak in, if you're around here, you know that I like to sneak in nutrition. This I am doing molasses. Normally people just buy brown sugar, but I like to have my molasses on hand because I know the source versus whatever's in brown sugar. So I'll just add some molasses. It adds a depth of flavor also. And with the flax, you do 1 tablespoon of flax, 3 tablespoons of water.
And this baked oatmeal recipe is so universal that you can swap ingredients so easily. You can not have any fruit and just do some spices or coconut or chocolate chips. And then depending on the time of the season, we can do apples and cinnamon, or we can add some pumpkin and pumpkin pie spice, or blueberry with lemon zest, or orange cranberry is a favorite in the winter also. It's so very versatile for being a base recipe.
All right, my beans are done, and I just mixed up 2 batches of my refried bean seasoning mixture. It uses cumin, chili powder, paprika, salt, a little pepper. I'm using my home olive oil and homegrown garlic, and then lots of butter. And a trick with butter, if you want some softened and don't want to use your microwave, just use room temperature water and put a stick of butter in there. In like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, it will be softened enough and use it and still have nutrients versus the microwave. And I'm not sure how many cups of this 4 cups of dried is gonna give me. My recipe calls for 4 cups of cooked beans, and I am gonna put together some bean burritos with some cheese for the kiddos for the freezer. It's something that we used to eat quite often and we don't. I usually pair it with some sour cream and some homemade guac or chips and salsa. It's a really quick lunch I can pop in the oven while we're still doing school. And this is a recipe, again, that I've used for like a decade, and it's always a hit. Cups, but it doesn't feel like there's a ton left in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and strain it out, strain most of the water out and see how many beans, because if there's not that much, I'm just gonna go ahead and mix them up in here anyway. 2 batches, so I'm gonna go ahead and a little raw garlic never hurt anybody. So I'm gonna do a big tablespoon of that.
I will leave all of the seasoning recipes in the description below. Sometimes I would normally actually have that on the stove and I would saute the garlic a little bit before adding the beans. Today I didn't. It didn't make much of a difference. And then you can also use black beans instead of pinto beans if that's what you have on hand. I do that plenty. And then I also find that it makes a real difference when you add plenty of butter or some kind of healthy fat, whether that's lard, because it gives you that creamy texture like you would get in a Mexican restaurant. Before I had my immersion blender, I would usually just use my blender for this. And then blending it versus just mashing it with like a potato masher, which I've done plenty of time, lends itself to that Mexican restaurant texture. And I always have someone to help with taste testing or helping in the kitchen. There were only about 2 cups of beans left in my Instant Pot, so I did go ahead and add those.
Okay, while the refried beans are cooling down, I just rinsed out my Instant Pot again so I can go ahead and use it. This is a lentil soup and we really like it. I like to serve it on the side of crackers or naan bread, or I do like soup sandwich, soup grilled cheese, something like that. It has a lot of protein with the beans and the quinoa, so it's a meal in itself and it's pretty gentle on the stomach too. If people are sick, it's a soup that you can have, because honestly, not all of my children like chicken noodle soup. So it uses broth as the base and it has only a couple spices. Some of my children like to add extra lemon when we're serving it. And then I am adding, this recipe I made up after the brand Amy's Golden Lentil Soup. That is so good, but it's so expensive, especially as a large family. So I don't buy it anymore. So this is the closest thing I've gotten to actually a lentil soup that we like. but the ingredients don't show everything on the label either, so it says like spices. The carrots add a sweetness, and I just ordered some saffron. I'm not really familiar with, but I know it's some Indian type meal, so I'm gonna put like 2 or 3 little, like maybe 2 little ribbons, I don't know what they're called. But this is also a recipe that you just throw it in and it cooks in your Instant Pot in literally 5 minutes. So it's really easy, but it's also easy to like prep and then freeze, because it freezes and defrosts so amazingly well. So I'm gonna make a batch of this. If some of the children want it for lunch, they can have it. If not, I'll cool it down and get it into freezer container.
I will add the lentils, the quinoa, and the split peas, and then I go off to rinse everything off before I bring it back to the Instant Pot to add my carrots and my seasonings. And you could chop the carrots up. I shredded them today. They cook down really well. I never buy frozen carrots because I don't like the texture. If your children don't like the texture of the carrots, you could absolutely use your immersion blender after it's done. And then, like I said, it's only a couple of seasonings. It is cumin, curry powder, some salt, and then I add broth and some lemon juice. Now, you could add water, but you're not going to get a lot of flavor if you do that. I have done that, or if I'm low on broth, I'll do a mixture of broth and water, but you might have to add a little bit of seasoning or more lemon juice for an extra flavor. Or if someone is sick, you can just not add as many spices, just so it's more gentle on the tummy. And then it throws in the Instant Pot on high pressure for 5 minutes. And then it comes out pretty smooth. All of the pieces are just kind of melt in your mouth, but like I said, you could throw it with your immersion blender if you wanted to.
Okay, it's lunchtime and I've been in here for probably an hour and a half and I'm kind of losing steam. So the lentil soup is going right now. The beans have cooled down enough that I can make the bean burritos. I have a small batch of cheese, and honestly, I'll serve that to the children right now. And then once the cheese is run out, it's fine. I can freezer burritos without cheese, but I'll serve them with sour cream and guacamole. So they're not gonna miss the cheese. It's not necessary. But they decided they wanted this since it's been a while since we had both of these things. So those that want both they can pick and choose. So that's my point. I'm losing steam. So I'm going to serve lunch, take a little break, and come back during nap time. The only thing that is left is the meat is still in the oven, which is fine because I'm using that mostly for dinner.
Children decided they wanted lentil soup and bean burritos for lunch, so that's what we did. I used all of the cheese for the children's lunches, so these are just the beans. And then for the freezer, what I do is, since I reheat the burritos in my oven, it's easier to lay them as flat as possible. That way it reheats a little easier and faster from frozen. And then I kind of use the beans almost as kind of like a glue, so it holds its shape a little better. And then I will roll these out and I stick them on a cookie sheet. I'll flash freeze these on my cookie sheet and then put them in a gallon bag labeled bean burritos. I sometimes do this with like chicken and rice and things, but it's been a long time since I got back into this routine. Then I didn't have enough tortillas, so I have just a small batch that actually goes in the freezer, and I can serve this up when we have like a taco night or enchiladas or haystacks. and then always, always the dishes going. I'm moving back over to my butternut squash, which is cooled down for me to handle, and then I decided I wanted to go ahead and use my immersion blender since I already had it out. I'm going to blend this up, and then I'm going to use this in a little bit. And I would love to know if you have any experience with cooking a bunch of butternut squash like this and blending it and then freezing it and then pulling it out for any kind of soup or like pasta sauce or anything like that. I have not done that, but it's something that I was thinking about doing because one of my children had asked about having butternut squash soup. Last year from Aldi, I got a butternut squash pasta sauce that my children really liked, so I thought about maybe making it myself. As I'm pulling out these baked muffin cups, I was realizing maybe it would be smart to just have a batch of parchment liners on hand just for freezer cooking days, because it would have been a little bit faster to pull all these out, less mess to have to clean up, and then just that much more convenient. So I might go ahead and do that. I have silicone liners, but I was reading an article recently, and I'm not sure. I was reading an article recently on silicone molds and leaching into the food, so I have to do some more research, but I might go ahead and move to parchment liners if I'm doing big batch freezer cooking or just buttering the pan really well to go ahead and use. Because even though I let these cool, some of them just still stuck to the side or started to crumble and kind of fall apart, but that's okay. Because the children wanted lentil soup with lunch, I only fill up 2 of the containers. I would have normally had probably 3, possibly 4, but that's okay. 1 container I know will serve us for a lunch if I serve it with some vegetables or fruit and then maybe a sandwich on the side. So I got 2 meals out of this.
I found some bacon in the fridge. I was gonna do BLTs, but what I'm gonna do instead is actually make another breakfast. And while I'm gonna just pop it in the oven with the braised meat, because it's almost time to come out. So I'm going to finish the bacon off and I can pull both of those out. And then while that's baking, I mixed up the butternut squash with my immersion blender, and I am gonna go ahead and make my grandma's A to C bread. I do have a recipe here on the blog from a few years ago, but basically it is a recipe you can swap out ingredients. So if you have zucchini flowing in, do zucchini bread. If you have pumpkin, do pumpkin. If you do carrot cake, you do shredded carrots. I have swapped out a few of the ingredients to make it a little bit more healthy. Instead of like canola oil, I use coconut oil, flax eggs for eggs, but that'll use up my butternut squash. And then I'm gonna make this yummy breakfast, and then I'm gonna see how much more steam I have to see how much more I can get done. And then I think we're just gonna do like haystacks with the braised meat instead of doing full-on enchiladas because Mama's tired.
And this was another recipe the children were really excited about because I haven't done a lot of baking since it's been summer. So this was a well-received recipe also. The video to this and recipe will be linked in the description. And right now I am just measuring how many cups of puree I have to know if I can single batch or if I can double batch, which I had just enough to do a double batch. So I'm gonna mix up a whole big old bowl of batter, and then I'm gonna end up splitting into two to do a different flavor. And normally I would do the sugar and coconut oil right away, but since I measured out, it's gonna be fine. The puree was still a little warm, so when I add the coconut oil, it kind of melts it just enough that I need it to be. The butter or coconut oil does not need to be melted, it just is supposed to be softened. So it was fine to mix up just the way it was. And I'm doing the flax egg again because again, it's baking. So I want to save my regular eggs for fresh eating. And then my husband just bought me this ergonomical spatula, and I can't tell you how good it feels to have like tools that actually help you. I know that seems silly, but this ergonomical spatula has been my favorite because it just rests, and when you twirl it around the bowl, your wrist doesn't hurt. I know it's weird, but it really does make a difference. And then I'm back to grinding some wheat to add to my baking and my bread again. So I am grinding just enough that I do maybe like a 40-60 blend of flour, chopping those nuts while my wheat grinds, and I can finish adding it to my batter. And then, like I mentioned, I'm splitting my batter into two separate bowls so I can do two different flavors. The first one, I'm gonna add some cocoa powder. I honestly don't measure this. It was probably a third of a cup that I did and mixed it in. The other batter is going to be the typical pumpkin bread, so I added pumpkin pie spice. And then with the baked oatmeal cup fiasco, I decided I was just gonna do 9x13 pans. So I buttered those and figured I could just cut slices later and package them up that way. Since I already had to really scrub those muffin tins out already once, I wasn't gonna do that again. And I normally go for the muffin pans just because it's quicker to bake with. But the 9x13s, you can expect for it to bake for 45 to 55 minutes depending. And I like that my Pyrex ones can have a lid on it, and I pop those in the fridge. So we enjoyed a little bit of everything that I made today over the next couple of days, which is what you want when you're freezer cooking too. Just plan on eating some of it so you don't get frustrated when you wanted it all to go in the freezer and then you ate it fresh. Just know and expect that some of that is gonna get ate. And I'm just smoothing this on, adding some of those pecans for the pumpkin pie bread, and then I will pop these in the oven while I keep moving on.
Okay. The next recipe is, if you've ever went to Panera Bread and tried one of their egg souffles, it's one of my favorite things. I actually, this past winter, I found a homemade version of it and put it together. So the crust is a puff pastry, and make this at home. There's so many less ingredients. It's flour, salt, a tad bit of sugar, and a bunch of flour, and then just some water. You roll it out, you fold it in thirds, you roll it out, you fold it in thirds a few times, and then you can pop it in the fridge. It lasts, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. You can make it into desserts or use it as a crust for a quiche or something. Or we've even used it for like homemade Pop-Tarts and things. So it's really easy, and it actually freezes well since it doesn't have yeast in it. You can actually prep a bunch of this and saran wrap it up really good and throw it in the freezer. And it's also why I wanted to cook up that bacon. And then you need to make a little bit of a roux and use only a couple eggs. And I'm gonna end up making this in a muffin tin because I don't have enough ramekins to make them bigger, but that's okay. And I'm gonna show you how I do this as soon as I can get all this butter cut into my flour. I'll show you how to fold it, roll it up, and then while I make the roux and get everything else prepped, I'm gonna keep this in the fridge because you want that butter to stay cold so it forms nice flaky layers.
The beginning of my homemaking cooking from scratch journey, biscuits and pie crust and things like that were never on my list because I always found them difficult, and I didn't understand that sometimes the recipe calls for ingredients, but you have to adjust those depending on the temperature in your home, or maybe the flour is not the same flour as you bought last time and it acts a little different. So it can be tricky, but it's so worth learning to make certain things like biscuits and pie crust because they are universal. I've also learned over the years, if I can have and order it at a restaurant, I can learn to almost always make it at home. And I know the ingredients that were used. I know something like biscuits and puff pastry and stuff. It's more about the technique necessarily than specifically measurements or anything. I think that's one way I have kept it fun in the kitchen, is because I'm constantly learning new recipes. There are plenty of recipes that my husband asked for or my children ask for. If it's their birthday, I can almost guarantee I know what they're gonna ask for because it's one of their favorite things. But also trying new recipes. I get a lot of cookbooks from the library, but also I'm inspired by like this Panera recipe because we don't go to Panera that often anymore, but it's a favorite that we used to eat when I had a few less children, and it was like a special Saturday morning. So I've just adapted it so I can learn how to cook it at home, and then it doesn't have to necessarily be a special treat. And if I'm freezing or meal prepping to make things easier so I'm not in the kitchen 24/7, I do make 3 meals a day plus snacks and desserts. That's probably over 100 meals every single month, and it can get cumbersome and frustrating and, get in the ruts of things. But having recipes from the library, checking out books, being inspired by people on social media, or recipes that you're just looking up because you want, maybe, you have a bunch of potatoes, you want to find a new recipe. All that keeps us inspired in the kitchen. And I suppose that was some of the inspiration by starting my YouTube channel is about cooking from scratch. Even though we're a large family, you don't have to just eat plain, boring meals. And we've always heard the connection of a smell or a flavor or a recipe can bring us back because they connect us to memories. And since I homeschool and my children are all in there, it's just one more connection I have to cultivate in my family. So maybe, when I'm a grandma, my kids and my grandkids come back to me and say, whatever I'm going to be called, Nana, Nano, Grandma, can you make me your special biscuits? Those are something I'm cultivating now because I want that in my lifetime, and it's something you have to practice. So if anything, I hope this gives you a little bit of inspiration.
Okay, I hope you saw that. I made the roux, I let it sit for a minute, and then I added the scrambled eggs, and it looks chunky, but it's supposed to because the eggs are not cooked. And you saw me pop the puff pastry back in my fridge until the eggs and stuff were done, and I brought it out. You want a hot oven. When it comes to puff pastry or pie crust or biscuits, you want cold dough and a hot oven to create those air pockets. You can assemble and then stick it back in the fridge until your oven is nice and hot. I have mine up at 425. The only time you don't want to use that is if you have a glass pan. Cold glass into a hot oven, breakable, expensive, replacement, terrible. So I'm gonna go through and fill all these. Gouda would have been better, baking Gouda is just so good. I do have some green onions that I freeze dried from my garden that I'm gonna put in there, and then a little cheese on top. And then I like to fold over the puff pastry if there's enough room, because the cheese helps give a layer, because I feel like when you do egg bites, it creates like a crust, and then you almost, it's so chewy and hard. It must be some of the proteins in the egg. So I'm gonna assemble this, put a little cheese on, fold it over, and then I'm putting it into my hot oven for approximately 25 minutes or so. Okay, I'm about to wrap it up. I just put some rice in for dinner because we're gonna have some taco haystack type bowls. And I just wanted to show you, this meat is so super tender and it's got a lot of flavor on it. And I can just push it down with a spoon into the juices, and I'll cover it a little bit, and then we'll eat whatever we want for dinner, and I will put the rest into a container for the freezer. But I just wanted to show you how tender this meat was.
I forgot to show you the bites after they came out of the oven. One thing I forgot to do was an egg wash on top. It would have given it a golden brown look, but I'm just packaging everything up. I want to say, if you've made it this far, thank you so much. This is probably the longest video I've had on my channel, and I really actually do these meal preps often, and I didn't know if anyone would be interested in a full-on talk with me, cook with me video. So if you like this and want to see more, just leave me a comment. I'm back to once a month grocery shopping now that it is fall, and I will also have some preservations from the garden coming up. So I hope you stick around, and if you're not subscribed, I would love if you joined me.